Hello again, everyone. Welcome to the opening bell with Alex Steedman and Matt Christie, who's back this week from his sojourn. We're going to talk about that fantastic fight down in Southampton where Ryan Garner just laid his heart and soul bare on that boxing ring at his beloved St Mary's in front of many of his friends, family, and fans. So we'll talk about Garner against Magnesi. That was a cracker, fight of the year contender. This weekend, we've got two bright stars, haven't we? With Boots Ennis returning to action, taking on a 154-pound champion in the shape of Xander Zayas, who might be the sort of guys it's easy to damn with faint praise. And then you go and watch back some of his fights and you realize he's probably much better than you think and probably a lot better than his record as well. So Zayas against Ennis, Xander Boots, that's coming up this weekend as well. And in the history books from 1999, yeah, we're going to party on the show today. We're partying on the pod like it's 1999. Johnny Tapia against Paulie Ayala, the first fight. That fight of the year from 1999 is coming your way on the podcast as well. Matt, welcome back. How was it? How was your break?
It was everything I wanted it to be. It really was. It was beautiful. We were staying in Corfu, in Guvia, lovely kind of little village where everybody knows everybody. We were at a hotel right by the sea, sun lounger every day. I'd go off at midday and have a beer in the local pub, chat to some of my new pals. It was great. It was great. There were 2 nights where my wife went utterly ballistic. Much to my annoyance. I think we'd got about 3 days in, and she said to me, "Oh, I haven't had one of those days where I kind of lose control a bit." And lo and behold, it came the following day. But yeah, we had a fantastic time. Good to be out there as well when England kicked off their World Cup campaign in glittering fashion, and we were in a pub accompanied by an Elvis tribute act, which was very good. Thank you very much. Which had me in bits all the way through. So yeah, fantastic holiday. One of the very best I've had, and I think we're already talking about going there next year for just a little trip. So it kind of left a special mark on both of us.
Oh, fantastic. Read any books?
I only read the one. I knew you was going to ask me this. I only read the one, and it was John and Paul, which is a love story in songs, and it's about John Lennon and Paul McCartney. And I was kind of motoring through it on the first day. Now, essentially, it takes you through the history of the Beatles, but delving into the songs and kind of really brings home the complexity of what they were doing, how ahead of the time they were, the progression, and how keen they were to improve the music they were producing, particularly when they went into the studio years. But I got about a third of the way through it quite quickly, and it was mentioning various songs. It was talking about the various nuances in the songs and certain lyrics. And I thought, I need to be listening to the music as an accompaniment to this. So essentially, I went back and read bits again whilst also listening to Beatles songs over and over again. And it was a wonderful experience. If anybody is a Beatles fan, or you're not, you're just aware of them, it's still a glorious read. Do so with some headphones close and some Beatles albums close, and you'll get much more out of it.
Fair play. Fair play. Okay, well, we love you. Yeah. Welcome back, Matt Christie. But Barry Jones was in sparkling form, as you'd come to expect last week. Good chat about Bam Rodriguez and Inoue in particular. Subsequent to that chat, actually, I saw a line from either from Bam or from his team, or suggested that maybe he go after Inoue's brother first and then on to Inoue, which would be a good storyline, as well as maybe acclimatizing yourself at the weight.
It would be a good storyline, and from what I can gather, it is only that. But it would be a very good storyline, a risky one as well, I think, for Bam Rodriguez. But from what I can gather, judging by reports in Japan yesterday, Inoue's promoter has said that He has an enormous fight coming up in February. You can probably all guess which one it is. We've also heard from Bam Rodriguez's trainer, Robert Garcia, who says that Bam will have another fight before then, before February, and it will possibly be to further acclimatise himself with a rise in weight. But it does appear that negotiations are in place for Bam versus Inoue in February 2027.
Oh, boxing, be my Valentine. Boxing, be my Valentine. That is a love note to the sport, that fight, isn't it? Even although there are various complexities, as Barry and I discussed last week. How much, when you were away, did you follow the rumbling story? How much have you caught up since you got back of sort of AJ Fury, where, why, who promotes, what the venue is going to be? Because subsequently in recent days, we've had Turki Alalshikh come out and say, effectively, when there's something to say, I'll say it, and you know that I'm the man to say it, basically. And then also, we get the newsline that Turki Alalshikh has pretty serious long-term illness and his health likely to diminish by the day. And given the funding of the sport and particular people within the sport, past, present, and would be, that could have serious ramifications. It's a circling story that we've discussed ongoing, haven't we, pretty much since the Saudi revolution started, Matt, about where the money's coming from, how long it lasts, and what shadow that creates now, but longer term over the sport, and maybe a hangover that it might create as well. So that's all linked, isn't it? How much of that did you follow? How much have you caught up with?
I was kind of following bits and bobs every day. I'd already kind of spoken to various people about the AJ Fury saga before I left, and it is my understanding that there's different contracts flying around. Fury's date of fight didn't match Joshua's date to fight. Fury's location didn't match Joshua's preferred date of location. I think the reports that have been coming out that there have been various stadiums and arenas in America that have been under serious consideration are true. But I also believe that what Turki Alalshikh says is correct, in that nothing really has been resolved. Frank Warren said something very similar over the weekend. Alalshikh has requested a meeting with all of the people that are currently at loggerheads, Frank Warren, Dana White, Eddie Hearn, not only to resolve the Joshua Fury location, promoter, etc., date, but also to hopefully create some kind of harmony for the long-term future. Should Alalshikh manage to do that, then that is by far and away his greatest achievement in boxing. I don't think he's got any chance whatsoever of making them all be friends forevermore. But hopefully he can bang their heads together around a table and get them to get Joshua Fury over the line. But as things stand, there's nothing concrete. There's an awful lot being considered. It's my understanding that Dana White has been tasked with finding somewhere in America, if it is going to be in America, and that, as we speak now, would appear to be the leading location. But people are listening to the feedback from fans, and there's been an awful lot of negativity. I think what hasn't readily been mentioned is that should the fight be in America, there might be certain tax benefits for certain fighters, depending on where their residency is. So, you know, we wait and see. And as ever, ultimately, all I can say on it, and I can't give you anything concrete, all I can say on it is the biggest story in June is essentially a non-story, because we don't know anything. All we know is that contracts have been signed. And when I say we know that, we're taking people's word for it that contracts have been signed. But I have it from more than one source that the contracts are different, as in the dates and the location are different on the contracts. So there's a lot to resolve, but everybody I'm talking to is telling me that there is so much at stake here. So presuming that Joshua doesn't slip up on July the 25th, presuming Fury does have a fight in the interim and he doesn't slip up, or neither of them look so bad they decide to retire, they will come together and they will make the fight happen. But as for where it happens, when it happens, that's all still up in the air.
So a couple of questions, Matt. Does that sound to you like the contracts will have to be redrawn and re-signed entirely? And if that's the case, does that open an avenue whereby theoretically, I mean, it sounds like Turkey's trying to mend bridges, but with the link to Zuffa and Dana White, could that open up an avenue for them to do whatever they want?
Potentially. I mean, it was written into certain contracts that Zuffa can't be the lead promoter, and they've got the fighter's signature on it. And then you see Tyson Fury come out and saying, I've got a big announcement with Dana White. Then he announces that Turki Alalshikh is his promoter. But of course, we know Alalshikh officially isn't a promoter. He hasn't got a promoter's license. I think the biggest concern at this point for me is we have been down this road of tangled chaos so many times with fights that we want to see. Now, I'm not saying at this point in time that Joshua Fury is the number one on anyone's list, but I think we want to get over the line with this one and just get it out of the way. But when the noise and the chaos and the he said, she said is at its loudest, is when very little is actually getting done. It's when they go quiet, nobody's talking about it for a while, that's when all things are good. At the moment, it's chaos.
I mean, I'm no lawyer, but if the dates don't match and the venues don't match, then the signatures would appear to me to be pretty meaningless. So that sounds like a contract that's got to be redrawn and re-signed to me. And therefore, what's already down and what he said and they say is pretty pointless and meaningless, essentially, if it's got to be completely redrawn. I'll move it on to the other point, which is the one at the heart of it for fans, and that is who should be calling the shots on this. And ultimately, by that I mean with the venue in mind, particularly, and the support that British fans, well, fans across the world, but in particular British, Irish, European fans, particularly the British and Irish, the support that they have given to Fury and Joshua over the years, it would be an absolute smack in the puss, wouldn't it, if that fight was taken away from the UK. Now, there may be commercial reasons, there may be tax reasons, there may be personal political reasons, but ultimately, who should be making that decision? Is it up to the fighters, ultimately, to say, I'm a British fighter, my fans are in Britain, this is a fight that my fans deserve to see, and therefore, I want it there? Whose call should it be? Do they have the power to make it theirs?
You would think that they would, and this is something that I've said for many, many years. If both fighters want a fight to happen, then surely they are the most important components in any discussion. Thus, they should have the strongest voice and the most power. So I believe that, yes, it should be down to the fighters to, and if they want it in the UK, and I'm not saying that they do, by the way, or I'm not saying both of them do, but if they want it in the UK, they surely have it in their power to make sure that it happens in the UK.
Are you intimating that perhaps Tyson Fury, rather than Anthony Joshua, might be leaning to an American fight?
Read into it what you will, Alex, my friend. Read into it what you will. Tyson
Fury, who's now living in a tax beneficial climate already. That Tyson Fury.
And I think that isn't Anthony Joshua a resident of the United Arab Emirates now as well?
Indeed.
But it is my understanding that one of the two stipulated UK as the venue and one of the two didn't.
Understood. So that rumbles on. As Matt said, there's a lot of talk about what we don't know, and there may not be much getting done. But it sounds like Turkey is trying to bang heads. The second part of that initial discussion was his illness and the time frame, the impact, the shadow that has right now on boxing and will have further down the line. That is impactful. What do you read about that? What do you read between the lines? What's your hunch? What's your intuition?
I think it's a really interesting line that he threw in there when he said, I want to get this done. I want things to be tied up. Obviously paraphrasing here. He said, because if he gets to 2027, 2028, I may not even remember what's going on or whatever. And I have heard from exceptionally reputable sources for a number of years that Turki Alalshikh's health is not in a good way, and he's been battling various things for a number of years, and they have been as serious as one can possibly imagine. And that is what I've been told behind the scenes. And I think for people that have been fans of the Riyadh season revolution, for want of a better term, should be concerned about what this means for the future of boxing in its current form, in that it has a power broker with purse strings at hand, like Turki Alalshikh has, to kind of step in and make the fights when he sees fit. Because for all the criticisms for him, if he demands that a fight is made, it generally gets made. It generally happens. I'm not going to call him the saviour. I think we've spoken before that I think the effect of kind of pouring all the money into the top of the sport has had a damaging effect elsewhere. He most certainly hasn't created a boxing utopia for my mind, but I think people that have gotten used to the big fights happening should be concerned. We wait and see what if that power and that influence and that money is naturally transferred to Zuffa. Because if that's the case, then perhaps we have got another entity that is able to make the big fights. But we've seen some of the problems that Zuffa have encountered. At the moment, they just seem to be swooping in and upsetting every single existing promoter in the sport and just saying to hell with contracts. We will go through court. We will pay any legal damages we have to. We're just going to get these fighters. Doesn't matter to us. That seems to be their kind of demolition plan at the moment to take over the sport. But in terms of Turki Alalshikh, who we know he has an exceptionally checkered past. I know it's troublesome for me, for you, for various people to kind of champion this guy from the rooftops for those reasons. But he has genuinely had the interests of the boxing fan at heart over the last couple of years. And if for any reason he's no longer in position, I'm not convinced there's anybody else in Saudi Arabia, at least, who would be willing and who would be able to get the money into the sport that he has managed to do. And even if we look at what he did in 2023, 2024, compared to now, that kind of never-ending conveyor belts of massive show-stopping fights and cards has slowed down to the extent that one suspects that already people are saying we can't continue to throw money at boxing like we have done. Because if you look at the bottom line with the outgoings for the sport that they're paying into the sport, they are getting nothing like that back. How can they possibly, even like the lavish ring awards, flying every superstar under the sun to be just so they can be photographed at ringside? All of this will add up, even for people that have access to supposedly limitless funds. We know that the Saudis have got a World Cup coming up, that they're going to be very, very keen to project to the world as the best World Cup there has ever been. Before long, that is going to have an awful lot of their focus. We've already seen them start to fall away from other sports, and I think soon their primary focus is going to be football. But I can't be certain, but this is something that I think we've been alluding to for a number of years on this podcast.
Yeah, and I think when it started way back when, the very first thing I said on the pod was, I fear the impact that it has on the UK in particular. I said that years and years ago, Matt. It was one of the first things that struck me was the shadow it would cast over the small hole scene in particular, but even the bigger fights getting made elsewhere that meant they weren't getting made in the UK. And that absolutely has come to pass. I'd be intrigued to know how much, because theoretically Zuffa could be his legacy and his final kind of love note to boxing, Turkey. I'd love to know how much he is involved with that beyond passing on the baton and giving the financial heft. I'd love to know if there's actually any input, any philosophical, ideological input into how that looks, because it has the fingerprints and the footprint of Dana White all over it at the moment, and it is chaos. It is throwing as many boulders into the big boxing pond as you possibly can. And the recent overtures to Johnny Fisher are further evidence of that, aren't they? Reportedly, he's been offered 6-7 times his kind of matchroom fees to go to Zuffa. You can understand he might bing potentially 5,000 fans straight off the bat, couldn't he? They could be sort of visible, raucous events or an event. And everyone knows that Johnny Fisher seems to have a ceiling and seems to operate at a certain level. But the short term, that won't matter to Dana White, to Zuffa. So a couple of questions there, but obviously the Johnny Fisher newsline is attached to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the most kind of revealing conversations that I've had recently is asking certain people, could you kind of step away from all of this and stage Joshua Fury on your own? Surely you have the resources to do that. If, you know, there's the pay-per-view price is hiked up, if it's top-end prices at Wembley Stadium and it's a sellout, one would think that you would be able to present a very lucrative and attractive contract to both fighters. But I've been told again by more than one party that simply isn't possible, because the money that is being offered by Turki Alalshikh essentially just is beyond anything that can feasibly be made in the real world. And thus, should Alalshikh disappear, then the boxers, an awful lot of boxers are going to be turning around saying, hang on a minute, I was earning this 6 months ago. I'm not interested, thanks. And that's the problem. And I think that is also a problem that we experienced with the boom of the pay-per-view era in the last decade, where fighters who go on pay-per-view earn this, then they're not going to fight anything else unless it's on pay-per-view. So you see more and more fights being made at pay-per-view just to put the right amount of money in the fighters' pockets. Then you get fans voting with their feet saying, I'm not watching pay-per-view. And then you start to lose fans from the sport of boxing. It's all a very, very simple model that we seem to be repeating on a higher scale. You know, as for kind of will Dana White and Zuffa be able to continue as they have done without backing from the Saudi Arabians, I don't know. They are getting a lot of money from Paramount Plus, but again, it doesn't quite add up to what they're spending at the moment. Nor does it fly alongside their initial promises to make kind of the sport be able to afford itself by paying realistic wages for the level of fighter that they're promoting. And if recent reports about Johnny Fisher are to be believed, then that simply doesn't fit, does it? Doesn't fit. It's not a sustainable model. So you kind of worry a little bit about the sport, but I'm not going to sit here like a flipping maniac doom-monger and say, oh, it's all over, the sport's going to come crashing down. Every single decade since the sport has been in existence, it keeps appearing to shoot itself in the foot, and it always survives. Something new will come along. But you do wonder now if we are at the point where you almost want to have a clean slate. Let's just build it now. Let's build it now with real money that can be made realistically, instead of just plucking these silly figures out of the air, which have no resemblance to what's happening at the gate.
And it's why, for many of those reasons that you've just mentioned, and that the kind of landscape and culture that we've just painted is why getting the big fights, it's just not been worth it for me. It's just not been worth it. Getting those big fights over the line hasn't been worth everything else that has come with it. The shadow over the small hole scene, the big fights not being made in the UK and Ireland in particular for us. The fact that payments for fighters has gone through the roof. It's created a culture that is unsustainable, a bit like Premier League football, essentially. As I said, I read that Miguel Delaney States of Play. The figures keep going up and up and up in football, but it is unsustainable. And as soon as there isn't money to be made from the investment companies, from nation states or whatever. I mean, they're after it for different reasons, but particularly the big American investment companies. As soon as they can't make money out of it, they'll walk away. They will walk away. I think ultimately what will happen is outside of the pay-per-view elite level, it will force promoters to go back to doing what they're good at. It'll force fighters in every other tier in the sport to be more realistic. And between them, they can go back to creating a sport that is more fit for purpose. And I think ultimately that's what will happen out of this, unless somehow Zuffa blow everybody out of the water, which is possible. It's possible. And Zuffa becomes the UFC, and then everything else becomes more fractured and layered. But anyway, we shall see how that unfolds. I want to stick with the heavyweights. Moses against Hrgovic, 29th of August at the O2. You watched the presser, I think it was yesterday, and Hrgovic was playing some shots.
Hrgovic, yeah, almost a new hero of mine with how he conducted himself at yesterday's press conference. I mean, I remember when this fight was first kind of mooted. First of all, when Moses Itauma, after his last fight against Jermaine Franklin, said, I want Filip Hrgovic, but Filip Hrgovic is fighting Dave Allen. Hrgovic then beats Dave Allen, and then it's all but confirmed. Hrgovic had asked for Itauma. He was one of 3 fighters that he'd wanted. No one is chasing Moses Itauma at the moment. Nobody wants to fight this young tiger. But Filip Hrgovic openly has said that that was the fight he wanted. And he carried that through with aplomb at yesterday's press conference. He said things like, Moses has had it easy. I respect him because he won the Youth World Championships, amateur, but so did I. And then he's had 14 fights. He's ranked number 1 by all these sanctioning bodies. He hasn't fought anybody to deserve that spot. And frankly, he hasn't. So he is promising, or he is hoping, to teach Moses Itauma a thing or two about the professional code in the heavyweight division. But we have to wait and see what happens when they actually get together in the ring. I think Itauma is going to be faced with, by far and away, the toughest test of his career. I think he might be shocked at times. I'm not picking Hrgovic to win it, but Hrgovic is going into this fight with zero fear and not a great deal of respect for Moses Itauma. And Moses Itauma himself said, he may not have any respect for me now, but if he goes into the ring without any respect for me, he's going to get punished. Hrgovic is so durable. He's so tough. Some of the things he was saying yesterday, that he's going to do absolutely anything to win this fight. And you know that I've been in the sport a long time. I've sat through an awful lot of these press conferences and really struggled to stay awake or take anything seriously. But Hrgovic yesterday really got me. It was good to see, and I think it's a terrifically matched heavyweight fight.
It is. It's good to hear. And very printable, very watchable, very listenable. But in the ring is where it matters. And as tough and as durable, as willing as Hrgovic is, he's also battle-weary, war-torn, a little damaged, one-paced, relatively slow, and comes in straight lines. So he is tailor-made for a young, fast guy. But if you can draw him into a fight, then you never know.
No, you don't. And so I think that is what everybody will be wanting to see, because we can't question anything that we've seen about Moses Itauma. We can only question what we haven't. And we haven't seen him take a full-blown shot. We haven't seen him being forced to drain the last of his reserves in a grueling 12-round fight. We don't know if he has got those energy levels in a grueling 12-round fight. But obviously, you have just very succinctly pointed out the more serious problems that Hrgovic is going to face, and they come from within. It's also his skin. He gets cut so easily, and you can just imagine in the first round, a few of those Itauma counters pinging off those big old bones above his eyes, and his skin will be coming apart. And that is something that will be out of Hrgovic's control. If Itauma opens cuts early on, the fight could be over quite quickly.
We got a fight of the weekend, didn't we? From Ryan Garner and Michael Magnesi. My goodness me. I mean, we talked last week, Barry and I, about how Magnesi could draw Garner into a fight, and both of us stressing how Garner just had to be focused. He had to be absolutely lasered in on the moment. Well, despite all the advice from the corner, from what we were suggesting beforehand, I think what Frank Warren was pleading for from ringside as well, and maybe friends and family kind of wished and hoped for as well, both at home and at St Mary's, Ryan Garner just did it his own way. And it was so much the better fight for it, Matt, because he beat Magnesi at his own game. It would have got hard at times. Magnesi wasn't as effective as I sort of thought he could be. He didn't hardly throw that right hand that Barry talked about last week, where he often whips it in as a double right hand really quickly. For some reason, he almost singularly tried to go with a counter left hook, and it did work for him from time to time. He caught Garner, but Garner was terrific. He was immense in a fight that could have given Magnesi more of a chance than maybe he was entitled to, both on form in terms of talent and skill set. But it was so much the better fight because of it.
And I think the way that Garner fought, where he was essentially playing into Magnesi's hands in a way, but the fact that he essentially won the fight in that manner is credit to his fitness, his focus, his strength, both psychologically and physically. He was going at 100 miles an hour in almost every round. Wouldn't advise him to do that in every fight for longevity, but it won him the fight this time. I think Barry said that himself. He said you sort of can't criticise him because this is winning him the fight. It was a terrific fight. Not the greatest fight ever seen on the British Isles. Might have been the best fight we've ever seen in Southampton. But it was a brilliant fight, and I've just got so much admiration for Ryan Garner for what he did. And essentially, as he said beforehand, as he said afterwards, that was for his fans. You know, I'm not going to listen to Frank Warren. I'm not going to listen to my trainer. I'm not going to listen to Barry Jones. I'm going to do this for my fans, and I'm going to put on a show. And he didn't half. Goodness me.
Indeed. But having the stuff, the minerals, the fortitude, the chin, and the energy and the preparation to then carry out that plan, as sort of foolhardy and maybe full of bravado as it was, but ultimately he had all the stuff to go and employ it. Let's not get carried away. Magnesi is a limited fighter, and maybe in a strange way, putting Magnesi on the back foot, stopping him come forward, maybe actually there was a little bit of method behind the madness. I don't know if that was the plan from Garner. I don't think so. But ultimately, as a de facto part of it, it actually worked, keeping Magnesi on the back foot, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. It did. And I thought we did see some nice little nuances to Garner's game, even when he was on the attack. I thought his head movement, though it wasn't exactly Pernell Whitaker-esque, it was there. You could see him avoiding shots when they're at close quarters. When Magnesi's got his back to the rope, he's instinctively firing. He's finding it hard to hit Garner, and Garner is in full flow, and he's hitting the target himself. Afterwards, Frank Warren was asked, wasn't he, what kind of performance does that remind you of? What kind of night was that? You've been in the game since 1980. Compare that to some other nights. And immediately the first names that fell off his tongue was Ricky Hatton in Manchester, Calzaghe against Kessler. I wasn't there, but I would imagine that inside that Southampton stadium, that would have felt like the best night for the vast majority of people that were there. It would have been incredible. So it's all well and good for me to kind of with tongue in cheek, not say it's the greatest fight that Britain has ever seen, because I think I'm just a bit old and weary of the constant comparisons to Hagler Hearns, the constant, oh my God, you've never seen a fight like this before. It was an exceptional contest, but I would imagine that the enjoyment that we felt at home would have been multiplied by 10, at least, by those that were eyewitnesses to it.
Oh yeah, I have no doubt. I mean, it would have been intoxicating. I don't think there's any question about that. And you wouldn't have had to been partisan to kind of feel it, I think, necessarily. So yeah, absolutely. I do think. I mean, I thought it was a terrific fight, and both men absolutely left it in there. And Garner, the way he went about it, the tactics he employed, I just got so much respect for that. I do think when you've got someone in Frank's position, I do think I think an aging personality or an aging promoter or someone in his shoes, I think the older you get, the easier it is to be a little more sentimental or maybe hyperbolic about these kind of things than you would have been 10 or 20 years ago. I might be doing Frank a disservice, but I think as a general point, that's a fair one. And I think over the last 5 years and in the next five, we've had more of that and we're going to get more of that. And that is just the circle of life, folks. That is just the way it rubs, that you get a little more moved by these things, whether it's because the finishing post is in sight and the end is getting near. I don't know. I suspect so, but you definitely lean that way a little more as the years tick by. And I think Frank's feeling all of that as great an atmosphere and as good a fight as it was.
He's earned it as well, hasn't he?
Yeah,
Frankly,
yeah.
he's really earned it. I mean, I think it was the week before I went on holiday. I saw that Queensberry was right up there in the most successful companies in the Times Rich list or whatever it was. I think they were 26th or something. And I think you can imagine how Frank feels now. You know, he's got his heavyweight stable. He's producing stadium fights like he produced on Saturday. He's deep into his 70s. And he has been, more so than any of that, he's been written off so many times. He's survived so many onslaughts from these young pretenders. I remember when I first started at Boxing News, within 2 years, everybody is writing Frank Warren off because Eddie Hearn is on the scene. Eddie Hearn himself is on the brink of writing Frank Warren off. Then you had Box Nation, which was wonderful for us hardcore fans. You know that better than anybody. But it wasn't the successful venture that Frank Warren promised it would be. Otherwise, it would still exist in that old form. But he has come back now, and he is probably the most successful promoter on the planet as things stand right now. And while I say that, you have to give credit to his son in the background who doesn't want to be interviewed, but is pulling an awful lot of strings and doing an awful lot of shrewd things business-wise, and that's George Warren. But yeah, full credit to everyone at Queensberry for what they're doing at the moment.
And Ryan Garner, he kind of cut his cloth, didn't he? I think according to the occasion, more than he did according to the opponent. I think it's fair to say the way he fought was more about St Mary's big home crowd opportunity, a little bit of keep Magnesi on the back foot, but mainly he just got caught up in it all and fought because of it all. So I don't think we'll necessarily see that version of Ryan Garner again. I think he'll need some of it for sure, because when you look at the landscape, I mean, you'd make most of the other fighters around his weight favourites to beat him, wouldn't you? The likes of a Shaki Foster, for example. And I think Frank would absolutely love to make the Kakachi fight, I think sooner rather than later, really.
That's the one that stands out as the ideal next fight for Ryan Garner. He's proved himself to be in and around the best in the world, but I still feel that he may need a couple more fights before he does start taking on the Navarretes or the Shaki Fosters of this world. But there are a lot of learning fights he can do. But going back to your initial point, yes, I would imagine. I can't imagine what it would be like to be standing in a ring with that many fans there wanting you to win, And I can't imagine what level that could possibly take you to. And I think in a way, even though Hatton beating Costas Yu and Joe Calzaghe beating Mikkel Kessler really shouldn't be compared to Ryan Gardner winning an interim title against an underdog, I still think that it really highlights what a crowd of that size can do for the performance of the fighter. Did we see Calzaghe produce that insane level of energy when he was fighting over in America? Did we see Ricky Hatton produce that insane level of energy when he wasn't fighting in Manchester? It will certainly take you to places that they may not be able to experience again unless they're in that environment again. But yeah, it will also, as we've alluded to here, it will also perhaps breed some carelessness that in a more refined setting, they're not going to be committing. But yeah, I mean, Garner, he's got the world at his feet now. But let's hope that they take the next steps carefully.
Massive thanks to our sponsors, NAS Medical. NAS Medical are leading independent experts in ringside medical care. They provide global medical coverage for professional and amateur boxing events as well. Ringside medicine training and basic life support accredited courses. Boxer safety is their priority. And you can find them at nasmedical.co.uk. So thanks to Neil and the team for their continued sponsorship. And thanks to the Apple Plus subscribers and the Patreons who for less than £5 each and every month, for less than a pint of the cold stuff in this hot weather every month, less than 1 pint a month, you can help power the pod. And that 1 pint would be gratefully received. And on a hot summer's night, downed in about 8.5 seconds. Thank you so much to all you lovely people. This weekend, we've got a good fight, haven't we? We've got Xander Zayas against Boots Ennis. Boots Ennis looking to win a world title up at 154 pounds. Xander Zayas is the champion, both unbeaten. Zayas, he's a big, strong 154-pound fighter. Ennis has only had one fight up at the weight. So classy, so speedy. But Zayas might be underrated. I think it's style over substance, Matt, in many ways for both of these fighters. Their resumes and their records beyond the unbeaten profiles don't necessarily tell us enough about their talents because they haven't really had the names or the tests in the boxing ring, either of them, in truth. But Zayas might be much, much better than people think he is, unless they followed him really closely and watched him recently, because he's got good footwork, really good judgment of distance, constantly takes that little quarter, half step back, feints. He does a lot of good stuff. Whether it's enough to beat such a rich talent like Boots Ennis, obviously, is a big question.
And we'll find out. I mean, going back to what you said initially, there's been an awful lot of hype around Boots Ennis in particular out of these two fighters, but yet we haven't actually seen him in with what we would call an elite level opponent. We wait and see if Zayas is that elite level opponent, but unless he beats Ennis, we probably can't say that he is. Ennis, I have long thoroughly enjoyed and admired watching him fight, his boxing style, how he goes about his business, what he says outside of the ring, how he appears to conduct himself. But he has had certain fights where, although when he's in full flow, he's irresistible, we've also, the one criticism is he gets hits too much. He can't afford to do that against Zayas this weekend. Zayas himself has said, look, this guy, Boots Ennis, he was hiding in Philly for so many fights of his career. All of a sudden, people are calling him the next superstar in boxing. He hasn't done anything to deserve that yet. We will find out at the weekend whether he does. It reminds me a little bit of the Shakur Stevenson William Zabeda fight, where Stevenson ultimately proved to be too slick. Zepeda made himself known throughout the fight and probably gave Stevenson his hardest fight. And I wonder if we're going to see a similar fight along those lines this weekend.
Okay, yeah, interesting. I think in terms of profiles, that kind of match-up comparison makes sense. In terms of styles, it doesn't.
No.
Zepeda, absolutely, million miles an hour, one-dimensional. He was very much made for Shakur, wasn't he? Zayas he's got a bit more. He's a bit cuter. He's got more technique. He's got more sort of boxing smarts, and he's got enough in him, I think, to make Ennis miss and to punish him. So I think Zayas has got a chance here. I do think Boots looks like he's got that kind of otherworldly talent, doesn't he? He looks like he could be a generational star. But so far, his record doesn't scream it. Even the 31 knockouts and 35, I think, is probably misleading, really, when you look at him. I suppose the closest we've got to maybe having some context was when he demolished Avanesian. So that's about as close as we've got to him realising some special talent. And we might see that at the weekend. He might be too slick, too fast, just too good all round. But Zayas at least will ask the questions, and he will present a technical and tactical setup that I think so far in his career, Ennis might not have seen so far. So I'm looking forward to this, really looking forward to it. I think Zayas has got a squeak. He's about 3.5, 4 to 1 to win. He's 11 to 1 to win on points. I think he's got a squeak, but it could end up being one-way traffic. And actually, you look back and you think, what were you thinking? It could.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm struggling. I'm struggling to see Zayas' victory. I do think that everything that we're saying about Boots is that, yeah, he looks like he's a generational talent, but he hasn't got anything in his record to prove it. We were saying the same about Terence Crawford. I know that's a really lazy and easy comparison to make, but I do think it is also kind of a symptom of the problems that we face in the boxing world in the moment, in that you have certain fighters saying they're multi-weight champions, they've won this many belts, but ultimately who on earth have they fought? And that is very, very common. And I think this is on DAZN pay-per-view, isn't it, at the weekend? And as much as I recognise the quality in the matchup, I think this, in an ideal world, would be the kind of fight to draw in as many people as you possibly can, as opposed to selling it purely to the hardcore, selling it purely to the converted, which is, I think, what will happen here. Because, frankly, not many from the outside world that don't follow this sport that we do will know even who Boots Ennis is, let alone Xander Zayas. But that doesn't mean it's not going to be a worthwhile contest. That's not me knocking the matchup at all. At all. This is a super, super matchup.
So what are you saying? Ennis on points? He's favourite. He's favourite to win by KO. By the way, he's even's favourite to knock Zayas out 7-4. That's nearly 2 to 1 to win on points. I think Zayas is a good boxer. He's a very, very good boxer with good feet, good IQ. I would say if Ennis is going to win, it's by points.
My instinct is Ennis on points, comfy. And I think he'll have problems along the way that he'll solve. But like you, okay, so my official pick is Boots Ennis on points, but I wouldn't be surprised if he does a job here, because this is the kind of fight he's been waiting for.
Yeah,
this is the kind of platform he's been waiting for, where if he wins and he wins emphatically, that is when everybody will stop and listen. So it could be this could be the time for him to do that. In fact, I'm changing my pick, changing my official pick. Just talk myself into it. Ennis KO.
Cracky. He's come back from holiday full of mythos and full of spirit, hasn't he? Spunky Christie, right. Okay, Ben Whittaker's on the same bill, isn't he? Against Richard Rivera, 35-year-old American. Do you know, when they announced these fights, this bill, DAZN did a really interesting thing, which at the time I thought was quite curious, but actually on reflection, I think was quite a good move. It was quite an interesting one. What they did was, in announcing each fight on the bill, they almost had a separate fight poster, if you like, for the social media posts. And each fight was top billing, with the others slightly lower down. So every single matchup got the kind of top billing on the social media post, which was quite clever. At the time, I was thinking, hang on a minute, why are you giving Ben Whittaker against Richard Rivera that kind of prominence when Xander Zayas and Boots Ennis are fighting? But they did it for quite a few of them on the undercard. And it was a really good move, actually. I quite liked that. Rivera is funky, isn't he, Matt? He's funky. He's very, very funky. He's loose. He's only lost a couple of times, including split decision against Badu Jack, would you believe, 3.5, 4 years ago. He's very loose. He's very open. He's a bit wild. He throws from funky angles. I mean, Whittaker could do an absolute number on him, but I think this is going to be a funky fight for however long it lasts.
It is, and I think when he lost to Badu Jack via split decision, a few people, in fact, a lot of people thought that was a bad decision at the time. He ended up losing a split decision when he looked like Jack was on his way to being upset in that fight. So I think really even the 2022 version of Badu Jack, the fact that he performed against that at that level should tell us all that Ben Whittaker will be in a fight this weekend. And if he's not, if he comes out and makes it look easy, that is on Ben Whittaker. That's not necessarily on the matchmaker. This is not a fight to. This is a fight to further enliven Ben Whittaker's profile. So they haven't kind of it's not a world title fight, and I think that if Whittaker does do a job on him, then yes, we get even more excited about that cocksure young Brummie.
Yeah, I think he will. You know, round one, round two, the 3 knockouts, sparkling, devastating box office stuff as well. Since he joined Andy Lee, they were all beatable opponents, but he did a number on them. This guy's beatable, but a bit like Garner last week, if he's not switched on, Rivera is willing and able enough, funky enough, unusual enough to cause him some mischief. So he's just got to be switched on. But yeah, that'll be fun, as they like to say in the business. Next up, it's this week. And this week we take you back to the 26th of June, 1999 at the Mandalay Bay on Showtime. It's Paulie Ayala and Johnny Tapia won. Tapia, the new champion at bantamweight, of course, long-term super flyweight champion, held the IBF crown, defended the WBO 13 times, was it, as a super flyweight. Johnny Tapia, unbeaten coming in to this one. Ayala with just the one blemish on his record when his fight out in Japan was curtailed relatively early. Paint the picture for us, Matt, on this one.
Well, Johnny Tapia was something of a darling in world boxing at this stage, and regarded as one of the best fighters of all, pound for pound. Not one of the best one or two or three, but he was amongst widely regarded as the best 10 in the sport. Ayala had lost a fight. He'd won 2 in the interim, but he'd lost a fight. Or did he lost the one immediately before?
No, back in '98, a few fights before.
But it was only about a year before, because in a recent interview he said he got the call just 6 months after that loss that he was going to be fighting Johnny Tapia. He was something like a 6-1 underdog. Nobody was expecting him to rise to the level of Johnny Tapia. 46-0-2 coming in. And, you know, it is an exceptionally bittersweet experience watching Johnny Tapia in this fight. He was such an intelligent and beautiful and elusive boxer. And he'd made a career out of that. And in this particular fight, you can see he's enraged in the opening seconds before the fight even starts. He decides, more or less, to stand toe-to-toe with Paulie Ayala. And what followed was what pretty much everybody agreed was 1999's Fight of the Year.
End to end, wasn't it? End to end stuff. Really competitive. Good first half of the fight from Ayala. I think you see glimpses of what Tapia could have done and had done previously in the first round, didn't you, Matt? And it looked like he was going to set his stall out. He's basically back foot, circling, a couple of fast, explosive counter shots as Ayala got a little too close. And you saw in that first round a glimpse of maybe how the fight could have or maybe should have panned out for Johnny Tapia. But whether it was because Ayala was just too aggressive, too front foot and made him fight, or whether Tapia chose to, a bit like Ryan Garner last week, is difficult to know, really. But ultimately, what we do know is that we got a fight. And we got a very, very competitive one. Probably the first half of the fight belonging to Ayala. And then from halfway, Tapia started to build and build and build. Ayala had a late sort of finish down the stretch in the last couple of rounds as well. But it's very competitive. There are several really close rounds. In the end, we got a scorecard of 115, 114, and then two of 116, 113 in favour of Ayala. Did you have a problem with that? Because commentary was leaning towards Johnny Tapia, wasn't it, down the stretch?
I think it was kind of split at the time in terms of the media as to whether or not it was the right decision. I'm surprised that Tapia didn't at least convince one of the judges that he'd done enough to win. As you say, I thought the final rounds 9, 10, 11 and 12 were really exciting. And even though you could perhaps argue that Ayala got the better of him, and particularly in 11 and 12, Tapia also really played his part in those final rounds. I actually got to speak to Johnny Tapia about this fight a year before he passed away. Now, I would imagine that the vast majority of people know the Johnny Tapia story. It's one of the most tragic and incredible stories in the history of boxing. And let me start it by just saying, when you see Johnny Tapia at his best, if only he could have kept himself on the straight and narrow, I think you could make a case that he could have gone down in history as one of the true top 10 greatest of all time. He was such a wonderful fighter. One of those where it's all just too easy. He got it. He understood it. It was in him. It was coursing through him. Unfortunately, for large parts of his career, so were Class A drugs. His father was murdered before he was born. He was on a bus trip at the age of 7, and he witnessed a pregnant lady alongside him being killed in the crash. A year later, at the age of 8, his mother was killed when she was stabbed 26 times by a screwdriver. And Tapia said to me in 2011, May 2011, in Las Vegas, inside the MGM Grand, I sat down with him for one of the most glorious hours of my life. And we spoke for about 6 months afterwards on the phone as well. But he said, my mom's death kills me every day. Bear in mind, this is years and years after it. This is when Tapia is in his 40s. He says, I couldn't get to the guy to kill him. I wanted to get him and stab him the same way he did my mom. That isn't when she was killed. That is many years later. Aside from winning world titles and everything else, his mission was to kill the man that had killed his mom. He said, I tried to find him the night before the Paulie Ayala fight, but that was when I found out he'd been killed. I was so focused on killing him that I didn't train. That's why we got the Fight of the Year, because all I did was bang. Now, this was many years after the Paulie Ayala fight. And I think, going back to the book that I was reading on holiday, the author of that, Ian Leslie, does a tremendous job. But he said he made a conscious decision not to interview people like Paul McCartney or Ringo Starr, and instead he preferred to go by the of the time commentaries and the of the time interviews to put his story together, because several years later, your memory of certain events has been distorted by what's happened since, if you see what I'm saying, or what's happened in the interim. But it may explain why Johnny Tapia was neglecting what he had exhibited to be his biggest strengths. And I think it is a matter of record that the guy that did kill Johnny Tapia's mother died in a crash or was shot, I'm not sure, shortly before the Paulie Ayala fight. Quite what he was doing, searching for him the night before the fight, if that is true, I think is possibly not true, actually. But I think we can probably surmise from Tapia's own memory of events that he wasn't as focused on Paulie Ayala as he had been for some of his other fights. He was troubled throughout his life. So troubled. And why wouldn't you be after those kind of beginnings? But there was an infectious happiness about him as well when you met him. And I remember we were halfway through chatting to him. On stage, they were building up the Super 6 tournament with the likes of Carl Froch, Arthur Abraham. Midway through our conversation where he's talking about the death of his mother, he goes bouncing off, leaps on the shoulders of Carl Froch, high-fiving Arthur Abraham at the same time, and he's desperate for someone to take his picture with Froch and Abraham. And so many people that met him, Paulie Ayala actually became friends with Tapia after their two-fight rivalry. You can see the respect after this first fight. So many people spoke about that warm, albeit splintered heart of Johnny Tapia. All he wanted was peace, and whichever way he looked, he could never quite find it. But one of the most incredible characters I've ever had the pleasure to spend time with in all my years in boxing.
Yeah, an amazing story. And this is a terrific fight. Hard to score. I mean, I sort of watching it down the stretch, I was sensing that Tapia was starting to sway things his way. Ultimately, there are just so many close rounds. I think the first is pretty close. The 6th and the 11th are very close. You can dispute those. And 4 as well, although you probably would lean towards Ayala in round 4, there is a really sort of sharp end, fast flurries at the end of the 4th round. It's almost a round in two halves. That actually round 4 is one that you could easily have leaned one way or t'other. Was it the finish of Tapia, the eye-catching flurries, or was it the body shots in that 4th round of Ayala? They say in commentary, don't they, that Manuel Stewart has sort of passed by their commentary position during the first half of the fight and passed them a note just to say Ayala boxing beautifully, got his tactics absolutely spot on. So, like me, Stewart saw Ayala getting on top through the first half, but I wonder if Stewart would have seen Tapia maybe turning the fight, at least, if not turning it his way. It was close. It was really, really close. Commentary of Ferdy Pacheco, Bobby Chiz, they certainly thought that Tapia had won it. Jim Gray, who did the post-fight interviews with both fighters, he said to Tapia that he had Ayala winning it, didn't he? So opinion was split, Matt.
It was, and like I said, it was widespread split amongst the observers that were there and that were covering it at the time. Johnny Tapia afterwards, even though he kind of took it as well as he possibly could, he put his arm around Ayala, made sure that Ayala had his hand in the air while he was doing his own interview. But Tapia then alluded to the fact that it was not in the script for him to win the fight. I think he said something like, "This is my last fight with Top Rank, and I'm moving on." Read into that what you will. Again, I'm paraphrasing, but that's essentially what he was getting at. And he was pushed by Gray, wasn't he, to say, look, the stage is yours. If you want to say you think there's a bit of skullduggery here, please say that. And Tapia, to his credit, said, no, the best man won the fight. We'll move on. And I think, even though Tapia has had probably convinced himself that he didn't train properly, his mind was elsewhere, the fact that they had a rematch and Ayala won that one far more comfortable, will also add some significant credence to the fact that Ayala may just have had Johnny Tapia's number.
The final 3 minutes is tremendous, isn't it? The 12th round.
It's glorious.
They literally just go toe to toe, head to head, and punch for 3 minutes. It's absolutely fantastic. Steve Albert says at the end of it, "How do you like that one? One of the best." And Jimmy Lennon Jr., just before he's about to tally the scores, he says the kind of now customary, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for kind of both of what these boxers gave us tonight. And then he just says, "Great fight." Jimmy Lennon, everyone in agreement. Ring Magazine, fight of 1999. And Ayala was go on a bit of a tear when he'd defend the title 6 times. No real household names. He'd beat Bradle again. He beat Clarence Adams twice. He beat Tapia again. So besides Tapia, there weren't really any marquee names. And till he moved up to featherweight at the tail end of his career, sort of 3, 4, 5 years later, and he bumped into Morales and Barrera.
He did. He lost to Morales convincingly over 12 rounds, gave a decent account of himself. I remember that fight, and then he announced his retirement after being stopped in 10 rounds by Marco Antonio Barrera. And in 2020, Ayala was kind of talking about the end of his career. He said that he'd been suffering with injuries for a long time. He knew that the moment he announced his retirement after the loss to Barrera, that he would not get the itch to return, and he didn't. He went on to become kind of the US equivalent of a small hall promoter. And then he opened his own gym, which I think is called the Hard Knock Sanctuary or something like that. But yeah, for a little while, Ayala was up there in and amongst the names like Tapia, Morales and Barrera.
And some of the names familiar to boxing fans of that particular period would be sort of matched up with Tapia as well. He'd go up to featherweight. He'd still be good enough to beat Manuel Medina, wouldn't he? Sort of 3 years later before he bumped into Barrera.
He was, but again, that was viewed as a stinker. That a lot of people thought that Tapia got the sympathy vote there in that fight. But as I say, kind of the life that he led. And I remember him talking to me in depth about his drug addiction and his relationship with cocaine that he could never quit. And he used to call cocaine his mistress. And he said the first time he took it, it was a mistake. The second time he took it, it became a relationship that he struggled to kick. And he would constantly refer to cocaine as she or her. I don't miss her, but I always miss her. And that is how he was referring to her. How he was referring to cocaine. But incredibly, May 2011, he was still an active fighter when I was talking to him. He was about 45. I also spoke to his wife, Teresa, and I said, "Do you not want him to stop?" And she was like, "Not really. No, I don't want him to stop boxing because when he's boxing, I know what he's doing. I know where he is." But she was already at the point where she said to me something along the lines of, when he says to me that I'm just going to go down the shop to get a can of Dr. Pepper, I have to go with him. And he asks me to join him in the gym in case he suddenly gets the urge. Because one of the questions I asked him in Las Vegas was, because I'd seen him the night before, bright white suit, walking down the Las Vegas Strip. I was over the other side of the road. I thought, oh my goodness me, that is Johnny Tapia. And he'd been surrounded by people. I walked over, kind of nodded at him. He was clear-eyed, he was sober. And I asked him the next day, I said, "Is this the best place for someone? No offense, but is this the best place for you to be?" He said, "Doesn't matter where I am. Doesn't matter where I am. If I want drugs, if I want anything, I can get it." He said, "I'm a danger wherever I am." So he was always, at the end of his life, acutely aware of the dangers of him not being focused on something, because the moment he wasn't focused on something, he would go down the wrong path. And then, as I say, he died May 2012, and his wife announced shortly after the death, after the autopsy, that there were no Class A drugs found in his system. It was nothing due to that. It was heart failure. He had hepatitis C coming on. his body had taken an awful lot of strain. I think he was taking medication for things like bipolar and all sorts of things. But there wasn't any class A drugs in his system, and the drugs that were in his system, which were for the conditions he was suffering with, were in no way had anything to do with his passing. His heart just gave out. His heart gave out. His big old heart, that was one of the most delicate I've ever met, ultimately gave way when I think he was 45, 46 years old.
Johnny Tapia against Paulie Ayala is our fight of this week from 1999. I've not read it. I read it a few years ago, but there is a book, The Ghost of Johnny Tapia, one of those sort of little, almost Hamilcar noir novellas. I'm holding it up for our YouTube viewers, so you can see that. Paul Zanon wrote it, really small. It's only sort of, many pages is it? 55 pages, something like that. So, quite an easy read. Goes back into his roots, his backstory, the drug use. But yeah, The Ghost of Johnny Tapia, Paul Zanon. It's not an easy read, but in terms of size of the book, etc., it is. So go and have a look at that. Drop us any messages, the Opening Bell podcast at gmail.com, where you want to get in touch. At Opening Bell on all the socials. Check out Apple Plus and the Patreon as well if you want to support the pod week to week. And we will speak to you again next time. Bye for now.